Hey folks, this is JR with DIY Prepper. Welcome to the channel. As preppers, we try to have all the different things that we and our families would need to survive, but if a situation lasts long enough, we're going to eventually run out of our stored preps. Now, of course, there are ways to renew and replenish our preps as we go along. When it comes to food, for example, gardening, raising animals like chickens and rabbits, and even aquaponics are all good options. But sooner or later, there may come a time when we have to look to our environment for additional resources. And most people's minds will tend to go towards natural resources. Even what remains of once urban areas could have edible plants growing wild in their ruins. Dandelions are an example of an edible wild plant that can grow almost anywhere. You can find them growing in places like old parks or even in between cracks in concrete. Small animals could be resources as well, because if we're dealing with the aftermath of a long-term widespread disaster, there's a very good chance that larger animals like deer and elk would be hunted to the point of extinction. Animal traps like these could be worth their weight in gold, since they can capture animals for food as well as capture critters that could be wreaking havoc on your garden. And the type of situation that we're talking about here is one that could be described as the end of the world as we know it. Society has fallen apart on a national or international level, there's no more law and order, and you've already outlasted a whole lot of people. Think of things like the movie I Am Legend or the show Falling Skies, minus the zombies and aliens, at least we hope. But you never know with all the flying Tic Tacs and other alleged unexplained aerial phenomenon going on right now. Now, given something like this is far less likely than things like natural disasters, which happen numerous times every year. And while we should devote the vast majority of our energy towards preparing for the most likely scenarios, it is a good idea to consider some of the less likely but far more severe situations. And if things were to completely fall apart and have very little chance of returning to normal, there could be some man-made resources that you could utilize. Now, when I say that, I am absolutely not talking about taking things from other people, whether they're the original owner or somebody who maybe just found something and started using it. So this isn't sneaking around and taking things people will probably be back for, and it is definitely not taking things by force. And you really might not even have to go out and look for those things. There's a lot of stuff that would stop being useful for its original purpose during a long-term collapse, but it could be repurposed for something else as time goes on. One item that'll have uses after a collapse is old, broken down vehicles. These can be a treasure trove of different resources, including raw materials, fasteners, and different items that you can repurpose. For example, entire cars could be used as something like a food dehydrator. If it's out in the sun, then you could stick something like sliced fruit on drying racks, put those in the back window or kind of underneath the windshield. And since cars can get really, really hot, then that kind of makes it well suited for a use like that. And since they're enclosed, they can also partially help protect that food from things like flies. Even tires could have uses, especially as things like fortifications. If you don't have sandbags, then you can stack some tires one on top of the other and fill them with something like dirt or sand. And also, you can use a whole bunch of them to create something like an earthship house. And when it comes to blockades, there are other things that you can use as well. Like you can take an old dumpster, remove its wheels if it has them, fill it with dirt, sand, or rocks. This could create a barrier that would provide at least some level of ballistic protection and would be very difficult to move. Landscaping boulders could serve a similar purpose. I know I have a lot of those near where I live, and they could provide you some decent cover and concealment, but just remember with those, that would go both ways. Another thing that you may want to make use of in an end-of-the-world type situation is different kinds of building materials. I'm sure that many of you've seen how people tear down old pallets and use their wood to build different things like furniture, but this can be done on a larger scale as well. Take my grandfather, for example. He was able to partially build his home using boards and beams from a home that had previously been demolished. But if you want to use wood that was previously used in construction as a fuel, you do need to be very careful. A lot of that wood, especially the stuff that you would find outside, was pressure treated at one time, meaning that when you burn it, it could still release some harmful chemicals. So that's not really going to be well suited for things like heating and cooking. Wood from furniture will probably have a finish on it that'll make it unsafe as well, and other things like plywood would be unsafe due to the glues and other substances used to produce it. However, wood isn't the only thing that you can repurpose. Nails can be pulled and reused, and the same goes for insulation. Corrugated metal would be very valuable since it can be used for so many different things. A lot of the times it's used to make things like roofs and the sides of buildings like sheds, but it can be used for other things as well. I used it to help make a container garden stand, but it can also be used to do things like create shutters to make windows harder to break into. It can be added to existing buildings to make them a little bit more flame resistant and hold up better against things like Molotov cocktails. Or you could use it to build a fence or a gate, maybe to keep people out, or make a smaller barrier to keep little critters out of your garden. Other things like windows could be useful as well. You could use several of them to produce something like a greenhouse, or take just a few of them and make cold frames. Both of those could help you extend your growing season so that you can grow more food for you and your family. Gutters can be pulled down and used to create or expand rainwater harvesting systems. Hot water heaters may still have some water in them that you can use, but even if they're empty, the hot water heaters themselves can still be used as some pretty large water containers. Old fences can be torn down and rebuilt somewhere else, and chain link fencing can also be used to create trellises for plants like vining tomatoes to grow on. Old barbed wire could be repurposed as well. There also probably wouldn't be a shortage of scrap metal in a post-collapse world. Things like old parts and even broken tools could be melted down to create new tools or other items that you may need. And a lot of the things that we'll talk about in this video may require certain skill sets like blacksmithing, and very few people can do all of these different things. So that's why it's important to continue to build out your own skill set, and then also try to find like-minded people who maybe have skills that could complement yours. Then there's several everyday items that you could use, and one of them is buckets. It's estimated that 250 million 5-gallon buckets are produced each year, and these won't just disappear overnight. These can be used for numerous things during a survival situation. You can use them now to hold bulk food storage. They also work well if you need to make a gravity-powered water filtration system. You can use a Sawyer filter like the one I have here, or use Berkey-style elements. You can also use buckets to transport and organize different kinds of gear, like what I did for this water preservation bucket. You'll also be able to find old glass bottles after a collapse. These can be used for survival tasks like boiling water, but they can also be used for defense. Broken glass can be cemented into the top of cinder blocks to make walls more difficult to climb over. My wife and I saw that several years ago when we went to Progreso, Mexico. We pulled into the bus station. They had these big, tall concrete walls with a bunch of glass cemented into the top. Appliances like old refrigerators and washing machines could have some post-collapse uses also. Box freezers like dumpsters could be filled up with something like dirt or sand and used as some sort of barrier. Old refrigerators could be used as storage cabinets, and even the drum from an old washing machine could be used as a fire pit. Metal cans could also be used for a lot of different things. Heavier cans could be used to make something like a forge or a rocket stove, while smaller ones work well if you want to make something like an alcohol stove, plant seedlings, or if you want to make an early warning system to help you know if somebody's entered your perimeter. Larger barrels can be used to burn things, or if they're safe for water storage. If you need to cook over an open flame, then grates from old grills or log holders from fireplaces could be used. You may also be able to find some energy preps in a post-collapse world. Solar panels, for example, are pretty common if you know where to look, and while a lot of us have our own as part of something like a solar generator, those may eventually wear out or become damaged. And I would just challenge you, next time that you're out and about on the town, keep an eye out for solar panels, because they're probably a lot more places than you think they are. Finding usable batteries, however, could be far more problematic. While cars and other equipment will have batteries in them, these won't take long to become unusable. And your best bet for that may be to just go ahead and pick up some batteries that don't have the acid added to them yet. If you store them in that way, they have a much longer shelf life. After a certain period of time, usable fuel will also be difficult to find because it has a pretty short shelf life. Most fuels, including gasoline and diesel, may only last a year, especially if they're stored in less than ideal conditions like what would be present during a post-collapse situation, but there are some things that you can do to make your own fuel. Things like old cooking oil could be used to make biodiesel. This would allow you to run things like tractors and trucks. If you can figure out how to build a gasifier, you may be able to run things like gas generators. Now, while I do strongly recommend trying to grow your own food as much as possible, you may be able to find some small amounts. You might be able to find things like junk food or bottled drinks, including water and things like old vending machines. And while I wouldn't recommend junk food being a large part of your diet, If you're really desperate, something with chocolate and nuts could be useful. You may also be able to find some small amounts of water on the exterior of buildings using a silicock key. While this water won't be pressurized and will need to be treated before you use it, it could still remain in those sections of pipe if nobody else has found it. And really, this is a skill that you could start learning now. If you have a problem around the house, instead of running straight to the hardware store, see if you have anything that could be used to fix it, at least temporarily. Maybe you won't leave it like that long term, but it will get your mind thinking of ways to reuse things if you don't have any other choice. Also, before you throw certain things away, ask yourself, is there something I could use this for? But just don't turn into a hoarder. You could also visit places like flea markets and garage sales. Even if you don't buy anything, you could be looking for items and thinking of ways that you could use those during a long-term survival situation. These are also good places to practice haggling, and that could be a good skill to have if for some reason our current monetary systems collapse. Another option could be going to storage unit auctions. There's no telling what you could find in those things. And I mean, it is just a good way to train your eye. But it's important to understand that with this, there's always going to be some element of risk, whether it's from other people or just kind of environmental hazards. So it's important to have as many preps as you can set aside so that you won't have to even think about this until a very, very long period of time has passed. Now, if you want to see some more urban survival tips, then you can check out this video, or if you want to see some urban survival tools, then check this one out. Just know it's one of my older videos, so it might not be as good as some stuff I've put out recently. Thank y'all for stopping by. Y'all have a good one.